Hello and welcome to Law 25, Ethical Reasoning. So let's get into it. What is trust and why is it an important concept in society? Let's take a look at an example of how trust is built and why it's important and how building trust can impact one's experience in life. This is a clip of a speaker who speaks to a lot of companies talking about how trust creates a different kind of experience between employees and customers. And I think it's a good example to show. So, what is trust and how is trust fostered?
We all know that trust is important, but what is it really? So I'll give you an example. It's sort of one of my favorite examples of what a trusting team looks like. A bunch of years ago, I was in Vegas for a business trip, and they were very nice to put me up down the street at the Four Seasons. It's a beautiful hotel. The Four Seasons over here happens to have a coffee bar in the lobby. And so one afternoon, I went and bought myself a cup of coffee. And the barista working that day, named Noah, he was charming and funny and engaging, and I stood there for far too long talking to Noah. And as is my nature, I asked Noah, uh, "Do you like your job?" Without skipping a beat, Noah said, "I love my job." Now, in my line of work, that's significant. Like is rational, right? I like the people, I like the work, I get paid well, I like my job. Love is emotional. It's a higher order connection. Like, do you love your wife? I like her a lot, right? Well, it's different. Right. And Noah said, I love my job. So for me, I was like, oh, that's a higher order connection. This kid's emotionally connected to his job. So immediately I followed up and said, can you tell me specifically what the Four Seasons is doing that you would even say to me, I love my job? And again, he didn't skip a beat. He said, yeah, throughout the day, managers will walk past me and ask me how I'm doing, ask me if there's anything that I need to do my job better. Not just my manager, any manager. And then he said, I also work at another hotel. He says, and there the managers catch us when we're doing things wrong. He says, there the managers put pressure on us simply to make our numbers and perform. There I like to keep my head below the radar and just get through the day and collect my paycheck. Only at the Four Seasons, he said, do I feel, there's that word again, do I feel I can be myself? What I find so profound about that story is this is the exact same human being in two different companies, in two different leadership environments. And our experience of him will be profoundly different, not because of the person, but because of the place he works, right? It's not the person very often. And so, when we talk about, oh, you can't get good people these days, I'm like, it's like the only common factor in all my failed relationships is, right? It's like if there's no good people ever that you can hire, I'm thinking there's one common factor in all those people who are leaving you.
That might be it.
And 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 uh, uh, and Noah's experiences, we have this twisted thoughts about how we get the most out of our people. Like, how am I going to get the most out of them? People are not a towel that you wring them out. How much you can get out of them. The question is, what kind of environment can I create in which my people can work at their natural best?
So trust is very important, and trust is fundamental in a society in order to create the kind of environment where everyone is thriving and where everyone is feeling at peace and able to be themselves and able to operate at their best. In order for a society to function, there needs to be a certain level of trust that it's not just something stated, but it's something that has to be built, and it's something that is fostered over time. In a system where you have a stable government, you have a stable society, there's a certain level of trust that it's built on, that's foundational. So, what does that look like? It looks like uh, knowing that there are certain rules in society, and the rules don't change all the time. They're not arbitrary. Feeling that people are being treated fairly, that there's some type of system that's predictable and people are able to function within that system, and that there's a level of comfort that people feel so that they can be themselves and so that they can live up to their potential or at least dream about living up to their potential. So there's a certain level of trust that's necessary, whether it's creating a positive work environment or whether it's just creating a positive city environment for people to live in. There has to be some level of trust. And so some of these philosophical theories, uh, they play with this notion of trust in different ways. For example, utilitarianism. If you have a system of utilitarianism where the greatest good is the goal of society as opposed to individual goods or greatest good for the individual, then the system is saying that what's the most important thing for people to be able to trust is that society in general will be okay, that life for the majority of people will be comfortable, or life for the majority of people could even be joyful or happy. So people can trust in that kind of system existing. Um, and the other major theory that we'll explore is the theory of deontology. And in that sort of system, people can trust that the rules are the rules, no matter what the outcome. That the rules are always predictable. And so the results are predictable based on following the rules. So that's how trust is an important factor in understanding how these various philosophical systems operate in the real world. So, what exactly is utilitarianism? Let's take a look at utilitarianism, and this next clip will explain what that concept is.
Utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is an ethical theory that determines right from wrong by focusing on outcomes. It is a form of consequentialism. Utilitarianism holds that the most ethical choice is the one that will produce the greatest good for the greatest number. It is the only moral framework that can be used to justify military force or war. It is also the most common approach to moral reasoning used in business because of the way in which it accounts for costs and benefits. However, because we cannot predict the future, it's difficult to know with certainty whether the consequences of our actions will be good or bad. This is one of the limitations of utilitarianism. Utilitarianism also has trouble accounting for values such as justice and individual rights. For example, assume a hospital has 4 people whose lives depend upon receiving organ transplants: a heart, lungs, a kidney, and a liver. If a healthy person wanders into the hospital, his organs could be harvested to save 4 lives at the expense of 1 life. This would arguably produce the greatest good for the greatest number, but few would consider it an acceptable course of action, let alone the most ethical one. So, although utilitarianism is arguably the most reason-based approach to determining right and wrong, it has obvious limitations.
Okay, so let's do a deeper dive into utilitarianism. So let's consider initial reactions and the core ideas of utilitarianism. One of the initial reactions when people hear this type of theory is, well, that sounds maybe a little socialist, or that sounds like the rights of the individual is second to the rights of the collective. And there are some economic theories that pull from utilitarianism. And so communism and socialism have some utilitarian elements. And so let's take a look at some of the core thinkers of this theory. So first we have Jeremy Bentham. And Jeremy Bentham created a way of measuring whether an ethical decision is taking place or not, whether someone's actions are ethical or not, if they're following a utilitarian philosophy. And so with utilitarianism, it's this idea that uh, the ends justify the means. And so if in the end the benefit is greater for society, then the means to get there is justified. And Jeremy Bentham has this calculus, this felicity calculus, or it's also called felicitous calculus or felicitous calculation. And with this felicity calculus, he states in his philosophy that if the end result is a greater happiness, greater happiness results in the end than suffering, then the ends justify the means. And so if more people are happy or more people experience less pain, then it's worth it that there's a little bit of pain as a result of this decision, because it ends up causing greater happiness than pain. So maybe a few people are a little bit hurt, but if the greater number, a greater majority of people end up benefiting, then it's worth the little bit of pain that was caused. And so uh, based on this reasoning, the ultimate goal of society's actions is pleasure, or is happiness, or lack of pain. Some people say that this type of thinking is more hedonistic, um, but it's not necessarily just focused on pleasure, but can also be focused on minimizing suffering for the majority. Um, and so, weighing these two things, if someone is making a decision, then it would be ethical for them to decide to do an act that will result in greater happiness for more people. And so they necessarily would have to determine the levels of pain versus pleasure in their calculation. Another theorist is John Stuart Mill. And according to John Stuart Mill, he is what would be called a proto-libertarian. So not a true libertarian, because he did agree with certain things like public schools, for example. He would agree with something like that, a public school or a public library type of thing. So he wasn't in the same um, camp of thinking as um, Ayn Rand, for example. But he's more libertarian when it comes to issues of individual rights or individual liberty and expression. And so he has a theory called the harm principle. And so I want to play this clip about the harm principle that will explain that in a visual manner. The harm principle.
In his book On Liberty, John Stuart Mill argues for one simple principle, the harm principle. It amounts to this: the state, my neighbors, and everyone else should let me get on with my life as long as I don't harm anyone in the process. One way of thinking of this is my freedom to swing my fist ends at the tip of your nose. If I don't have dependents, I should be free to drink myself to an early death, live as an eccentric, or explore alternative lifestyles, as long as no one else is damaged in the process. Paternalism is okay towards children, they need protecting, but never towards adults who are of sound mind. So, let me get on with my experiments of living, and you get on with yours. And even if I'm wrong about the best way to live, it's better to let me make my own mistakes. This individual freedom is the seedbed of genius. It's also the basis of enduring happiness for ordinary people. It needs protecting. Mill favors free speech, too, up to the point where it inflames violence. It's not just what you say, but also where and when you say it that matters. But merely causing offense, he thinks, is no grounds for intervention, because in his view, that is not a harm. He champions dissent because it keeps us on our intellectual toes and stops our beliefs congealing into dead dogma. We need a variety of views to think well. Censorship is the enemy of progress. Not everyone agrees, of course. Critics of Mill's liberalism think he went too far. Our lives are more enmeshed with others than he realized. And some speech causes deep psychological harm. Harm that can be as damaging as a fist in the face.
Okay, um, so some people will say, well, I should be able to live my life, and the state shouldn't tell me how I should live. And as long as I'm not harming anybody, there's that saying of your freedom to extend your fist ends where my nose begins. So some people will say, well, the state should not uh, be dictating to me um, who I love, or the state should not tell me that I have to cover my hair with a scarf, or the state should not be telling me that I'm not allowed to play poker with my friends for money. That if I'm not hurting someone, or if we're all consenting adults to sit down and play poker together, that the state should not be involved in that. The state should not be telling me how to live my life, and let me make my own mistakes. If I want to, uh, if I want to dress up and if a funny outfit and walk down the street, playing kazoo, and as long as I'm minding my own business, then nobody should stop me. I shouldn't be subjected to a disorderly conduct arrest. So, um, as long as I'm not bothering anyone. And so, there are different um, ways in which people want government to behave. There are those who say, well, as long as I'm not bothering anybody, I should be able to live my life as I want. And there are others who say, well, it's degrading society. And the children really are being affected, because when children look and they see a same-sex couple, that it's influencing the children in a way that I don't want them to be influenced. So that shouldn't be on television, or the state should not allow same-sex marriage and things like that. And so they are wanting the government to step into people's individual decision making for themselves and their interests. They want the government to tell other individuals how to live and how to behave. And so the theory of John Stuart Mill would say, well, as long as it's only impacting myself as an adult, no one else should stop me. And when it comes to speech, I can be unpopular. I can have an unpopular opinion, and that should not subject me to censorship. And so an example would be where someone says that they really don't like they don't like something everybody else likes. So maybe the majority of people believe that public libraries are great and they should have public libraries in their society. And someone comes along and says, well, no, I don't think there should be public libraries. You should have to pay for it. And maybe that's an unpopular way of thinking, but they're able to express that. They have a right to express that, even though the majority of people might not agree with it. What about something more important, like let's say the concept of climate change and whether that's real? Some people say that climate change is real, some say it's a hoax. Should someone be able to say, as a scientist, I believe climate change is a hoax. I don't believe it's real. Um, the majority of scientists would say that it is real, but there is a small minority out there that say that it's not. Should that small minority of scientists be subjected to any kind of punishment by the state for their opinion? Under this theory, they have the right to free speech. And so this concept is part of the Bill of Rights, is part of the notion of civil liberties, that people have freedom of speech and religion. The state's not going to step into their personal lives and tell them what religion they should believe in. The state cannot step in and tell them what they can write in their newspaper unless it's defamation. And in that situation, the freedom to stretch one's arm ends where someone else's nose begins. So if they're telling or printing falsehoods about people, then yes, the state will step in because now there's a harm to someone else. But can they print a salacious love story and sell that, a romance novel? Yes. Can they print science fiction stories that challenge society and challenge people's ideas of government? Yes, they can do that. Can they, in the United States, they can even print things that would be considered hateful or hate speech. And that's not the same in every country. In some countries, hate speech itself is illegal. In the United States, hate speech is actually protected speech. So people can say something hateful about another group. What they can't do is write or state a threat towards another group, because that would be harassment, or the threat of an assault, or incitement, things like that. So that's illegal. But someone saying, writing or typing that they hate those the people who live in this city, they hate that town, they can do that legally in the United States. And so John Stuart Mill would say, well, that's protected speech, and we need all kinds of ideas, all kinds of theories to be out there to be protected in order to have dialogue. And without dialogue, without the freedom of dialogue, the freedom to disagree with people and have multiple opinions out there, that democracy breaks down. Because if everybody has to think the same way and everybody has to express things the same way, then there's no room for dissent. And if there's no room for dissent in society, then there is no true democracy, because democracy is based on voting on what the public wants. And so the public can't have an accurate vote for what it really wants if they can never hear what the options are. And so that's how the this theory of harm principle, that's how it bolsters the ideals of democracy. That you have to have an environment where people can express themselves and be different, and you can have a minority in addition to a majority of thought in a society. So we've got these two principles: the felicity calculus, what's the greatest good, based on happiness or pleasure, versus well, in addition to the harm principle, and these are two distinct philosophies. So going back to the felicity calculus, I like to use the example of the last slice of pizza in Sicily. And so in this example, you have someone who was born in the United States to Sicilian family. And they're the only one in the family who never had an opportunity to go to Sicily until they became an adult. So they grew up their whole life hearing about Sicily, hearing about Italy, and they've never been there. And they always heard about this very storied restaurant in Sicily where they had the best pizza ever. Well, there are some who would say, well, already I don't believe this story because the best pizza is in Naples, but I digress. Um, and so they've always heard about this restaurant with this wonderful pizza in Sicily, and they've always told themselves that one day they're going to go to that restaurant and they're going to taste that pizza, and they're saving up their money for this trip and they're dreaming of this trip. And one day they get a chance to go. And so they fly to Sicily and they find out as soon as they arrive in this town in Sicily, they find out that the owner of the store, the owner of this restaurant who cooks all of the pizzas, is retiring. And the day that they arrived in Sicily, that is the last day that the restaurant will be open. And in addition to that, they've only got 1 hour to get to the restaurant from the airport. And there's only going to be, once they get there, there will only be one more pizza cooked that day in that person's entire career as a chef. And then they're closing it down. And so this American who grew up in the United States, hearing about this Sicilian pizza place, they finally get there. They rushed, they struggled, they get to the front door, and at the same time that the American arrives at the front doors in order to get that last slice of pizza that was cooked forever at that restaurant, at the very same time they got there, a shipload of tourists also arrived, and about 12 tourists got off of this ship, this cruise ship, and they arrived at the restaurant at the same time. Now, the 12 tourists from the cruise ship don't know anything about this restaurant. They're just hungry. And the cruise ship had to make an unscheduled stop because of some issue with the ship's bathrooms, or something's going on. So they had to make this unscheduled stop. And there are other restaurants in this town, but the tourists arrived at the same pizza place, and the doors are about to close, and there's just a little bit of food left at this pizza place. And so there's that slice that's left. Now, you've got 12 tourists who are all saying, well, it seems interesting to be able to taste the pizza from Sicily. We haven't had this yet. What if we all take a bite from this one slice? And then there's the American who just arrived who's saying, well, I would like this last slice. I've been dreaming my whole life to taste a slice of pizza from this place. So whose happiness is of greater weight? Is it the 12 cruise ship passengers who will each get a bite of bliss that maybe they had not even really thought about, and they're just hungry, so they'd be willing to eat anything, but they could each have a bite of the last slice of pizza at this restaurant forever? Or should the American be able to have that whole slice to herself that she's been dreaming of all of her life? And so if we apply the felicity calculus, um, we'd have to consider, well, who would be in the greatest pain from this decision and who would have the greatest bliss? Um, and so one could argue that, well, the American would be the most pain because her um, desire for this pizza is so emotional, is so emotionally based that she'll be devastated if the owner of the restaurant hands the last slice to the cruise ship passengers and she doesn't get to taste it. She'll be totally devastated. The cruise ship passengers, they could care less. I mean, they're just hungry. They could go to McDonald's. They just found out about this restaurant and they thought, that looks interesting. Let's try that place. But they're not going to be devastated if they don't get the last slice ever cooked at that place. But the American would be totally devastated and would go back home and be the only one in her family who never got to taste this pizza at this place that she's heard about her whole life. And then another way to look at it is, well, you've got 12 people. So you could feed more. You could actually feed more people than just one person. So using a utilitarian argument, maybe it's better to feed all 12 of these people because you could satiate some of their hunger right now if you give it to them. And if you give it to the American tourist who came to taste this pizza, one person will be very satisfied, but everybody else will just be standing there still hungry. And so maybe you should give it to the 12. I think that there's something to be said for weighing it in terms of who's going to have the most pain at the end of this decision. And so if we apply the felicity calculus, perhaps the American who waited their whole lives, perhaps in that instance, even though the 12 might lose out on tasting the pizza, perhaps it's a better decision to give it to that one person who's waited their whole life for it. But this is sort of a way of testing the felicity calculus. You may agree or disagree, but how should this calculus be applied? Sometimes there's a little bit of ambiguity in these principles that sometimes it's not totally clear what some of the calculations should be because we don't exactly know with clarity about each of the terms in our calculation. So the principle of utility is maximizing happiness and minimizing harm. And so in the case that I gave you, the example that I just gave you about the American who wants the pizza versus the 12 cruise passengers who each want a bite, maximizing happiness, that would weigh on the side of giving it to this one American who dreamed of the pizza all their life. And minimizing harm, well, you'd have 12 people who lose the opportunity to satiate some of their hunger. So this principle is based on, well, maximizing the happiness as well as minimizing the harm. And sometimes that can be a complicated determination to make. So there are some strengths as well as weaknesses in the utilitarian philosophy or utilitarian reasoning. Utilitarianism is focused on social welfare, and social welfare refers to the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So if we are considering the greatest good for the greatest number of people, then we also have to realize that there is going to be a minority group of people for whom the greatest good will pass them by. So if the greatest good goes to the greatest number of people, then there could be a minority who won't experience a good. They might experience some taking from them. Um, so social welfare prioritizes the greatest good. And a weakness of utilitarianism is that it ignores the person. So it might sacrifice the needs or the interest of individuals or an individual in order to benefit the greatest good. In a legal construct, if a judge wants to prioritize the greatest good, then the necessary um, sort of consequence of that is that the negative externality of that is that there's going to be some smaller group that won't have the opportunity to benefit. So that's like giving a judicial award where the uh, the majority of people are going to benefit in some way, but there's a small group that won't be able to benefit. And it could be because it's just not practical in order to benefit everyone. So a ruling that states that that there's going to be a fine against the defendant, the fine must pay so much money, and that money goes towards um, a um, a program to help students who are at risk. So those students, those at-risk students would benefit, but who doesn't benefit? Students who might not be determined to be at risk or students who are at risk but cannot be identified, they might not get to benefit. And also the defendant himself or herself or themselves um, will experience some taking from their property in order to satisfy this judgment that would benefit the greater number of people or greater good. In a political construct, a government might decide, well, we have so much tax money, we can use this tax money in order to provide food for children who are impoverished. And so we're going to distribute the food to various food banks, and they will provide the food to the children who need this food. But we can't get the food to every child who needs it. And so we're going to have to prioritize just based on the logistics of it and based on limited resources. So we're going to prioritize those communities where there's a larger concentration of impoverished children. So much of the food is going to go to the cities. And those rural communities with a smaller population, those children may have to travel a lot further to get to the resources. And so, who ends up being benefited the most in that situation is going to be people who are impoverished but living in a larger population center. And those who are in a more rural community might have fewer resources. And that's how it looks very often when governments make decisions that are based on benefiting the greatest number of people. So as a result of that decision making, and because of the logistics of being able to do it and also limited resources, sometimes there are people who would qualify but who are left out. And very often in a system with a social welfare construct, where it's a socialist democratic system, the majority or the greatest number of people who could benefit, um, they'll be the ones who are on the receiving end of government subsidies, but it doesn't go to everyone. And there are still going to be some people who are impoverished at the end. All right. So one of the criticisms of these theories is that it ignores the individual. And the next thing I want to turn our attention to is um, the reading. And it actually takes a look at the libertarian arguments against utilitarianism and the idea of social welfare and how the individual ends up paying for the uh, government ideal of providing for the majority by taking from the minority to do so. Let's turn our attention to the reading. This is chapter 3 from Michael Sandel's What's the Right Thing to Do? Do We Own Ourselves? And Libertarianism. And so in this text, it talks about how there are certain billionaires like Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey, and how there's one theory that the rest of society would be better off if a billionaire were to distribute their money to everybody in society. And so it says, suppose we take $1 million from Bill Gates and we disperse it to 100 needy recipients, giving each of them $10,000. Overall happiness would increase. Bill Gates would scarcely miss the money, while each of the recipients of the $10,000 would be grateful for this windfall. It could be life-changing for the 100 people who get the $10,000. Whereas for Bill Gates, he might make $1 million overnight in his sleep, so he wouldn't really miss it. And so it's a kind of Robin Hood scenario. And if you're not familiar with the story of Robin Hood, Robin Hood is a story. It comes from the United Kingdom. It comes from England, and it's this idea of a robber baron. It's a kind of a it's about a man who is secretly wealthy, but what he does is he goes around and he robs the rich and he gives the money, he gives the riches to the poor. So he's stealing jewels and things from rich people and he gives it to the poor and he's a champion of the poor. And so in this story of Robin Hood is held up as a kind of hero, maybe a chaotic neutral hero, but he's a hero who helps those who are impoverished. And many of the people he helps are desperately impoverished. And so this story, it's kind of a utilitarian ideal in a way. Although I would say that some utilitarian theorists like Bentham uh, would say that they could tolerate Robin Hood, but if Robin Hood's actions, if his antics end up leading to the degradation of society's law and order, where it becomes too chaotic, then Robin Hood ceases to be good. But as long as Robin Hood is stealing from the poor and there's not an increase of violence or chaos as a result, then maybe Robin Hood's actions would be justifiable. And so, in the Robin Hood scenario, one of the ideas is redistributing wealth, the redistribution of wealth. And some would say, "Oh, well, that sounds communist, and that sounds socialist to redistribute wealth." In those systems, like communism and socialism, they do have the redistribution of wealth. Um, and so that's yeah, that is part of those systems. Um, so one of the objections to the Robin Hood scenario, although Robin Hood is forcing it, Robin Hood uh, this character went around with his bow and arrows, and he could threaten. He was basically robbing this money, these riches to give to the poor. And so in the text for this week, uh, the question of, well, taxation, is that the same as having Robin Hood physically steal the wealth from the rich and give it to the poor? And so one of the objections to taxing the rich and forcing them to share more of their wealth with the poor is that it takes it's taking that money and it's redistributing the money to the poor in a way that would reduce the incentive of the individual to work hard and make the money. And so this is actually one of the criticisms of um, of communism during the Soviet Union, that ultimately people would stop trying, that some people would stop trying to become a doctor. If you're going to spend the years and the effort to become a doctor, and you're only going to make as much money as someone who works in a simple labor job, maybe somebody uh, who works in a factory putting a couple of buttons, sewing buttons on a shirt. And if you're going to make the same amount of money as basically a factory worker, then why would you spend so much effort trying to become a doctor? So that was one fear, is that, oh, people aren't going to really try that hard. And they're certainly not going to try to create a business if the government is going to end up owning it or owning the majority of their business. Why even bother? Why go through the effort of studying, getting licenses, proving yourself worthy of your customer base, proving yourself to your customers, and proving to the government that you deserve the funding for something, if in the end, after all of your hard work, you're you're going to end up having your income redistributed to your neighbors? Well, obviously, in the Soviet Union, there were still doctors, there were still people who had these different professions, and so they did it because they wanted to do it, they had the skills to do it, they maybe had a little bit more money than other fields, but not a whole lot more. Um, but there were still doctors in places like in communist countries like China, Cuba. Uh, there have always been people who worked in these different professions, and so it didn't completely eliminate people's desire to want to do these things. But one of the fears of communism is, well, people just aren't going to try. And in the Soviet Union, there were a lot of doctors in the Eastern communist bloc of nations, the Soviet bloc of nations. There were a lot of doctors and other professionals who defected, um, who left. And this is prior to the fall of the Soviet Union. There were some who would defect to other countries where they could make a lot more money. So, so one of the criticisms of utilitarian thinking is, well, it's going to lead to people not trying as hard. There's going to be less incentive to work in fields where a lot of expertise is required or a lot of hard work is required. It's going to lessen people's desire to invest in things if the money that they earned from their investments will be redistributed to those who did not bother to invest. Um, and it's going to lead to a decline in productivity. And some would say, well, if you look at the Soviet Union, they did have declining productivity because of, they people did not want to work as hard to produce things if they couldn't get ahead um, as they produced them. So there were those who believed that was ultimately one of the reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed. So there were other reasons why the Soviet Union collapsed, but this is one of the things that's often cited, one of these criticisms of utilitarian thinking when it comes to the redistribution of wealth. Another objection to the idea of utilitarianism and the redistribution of wealth is that it argues that taxing the rich to help the poor violates one's fundamental rights because it's taking wealth without a person's consent. And if you take their wealth without their consent, and basically you're requiring them to earn money for free. And so it's a libertarian argument that says that taxing people to redistribute their wealth to others is akin to slavery because it's taking their wealth without their consent. And ultimately, if they don't own their wealth that they earn as a result of their labor, then what are they laboring for? Who are they laboring for? Then they're laboring for the rest of society at that point. And if they're laboring for the rest of society, then that is a form of slavery. So that's how some libertarians will say, well, taxing is slavery. That does very much oversimplify slavery because in slavery, a person had to work for someone else and they weren't free to leave. In this type of situation where someone's being taxed, they're free to leave. They have freedom over their body. They aren't required to roll out of bed and go to work. Um, they're not required um, to work on a plantation all day. They can decide not to do it. So it's not slavery. But the one of the arguments that libertarians make is that, well, okay, it's not exactly slavery, but it's still requiring somebody to have to give up their consent to being taxed. And so they're not going to be able to benefit from the fruit of their labor for themselves or for all of the fruit of their labor. They have to give some of it to society, which didn't earn it. And so here's the Michael Jordan um, scenario in the text where Sandal talks about how some people would say, well, Michael Jordan shouldn't have all that money. Um, and I guess this was written a while ago, but we could use a modern athlete. So we could say someone like Stephen Curry or LeBron James. So there are some who say, oh, Steph shouldn't have all the money that he has because he just plays basketball and he's making millions of dollars and there are people who are working really hard at jobs that aren't seen and their labor is also valuable. And so it's not fair that somebody who plays a sport that they're able to make all these millions of dollars, whereas other workers are struggling to get by. And so using the Michael Jordan example here, the writer says, well, what about the fact that Michael Jordan had to develop himself? He had to develop his game. Actually, if one knows about Michael Jordan's story, um, Michael Jordan was not always a great athlete. Michael Jordan, when he was starting out as a child playing basketball, He considered himself to be one of the lesser players, and he had to really practiced very hard. He had to struggle. He had to grow into his body because he was still a little clumsy, maybe when he was growing up, or a little uncoordinated. And so he had to really, really work at himself and develop and struggle to get to the level of playing where he is, where he became, where he ended up. Stephen Curry works really, really hard. It's basically common knowledge that once a game would end, Stephen would still be practicing after the game, practicing shots. That he worked really, really hard at developing his ability to defend against opponents. And he's not the tallest player out there, but he's a good defender because he has worked really, really hard on developing all the different aspects of his game, not just the three pointers, but also a lot of other things. And so LeBron James. Some would say, well, he has natural talent, so it's not fair that LeBron James is able to make all these millions of dollars. He was born with natural advantages that other people don't have. And so he should have to distribute more of his wealth. Well, one thing we know is that people like LeBron James and Stephen Curry and other players, they actually do donate a lot of their wealth. Um, but some would say, oh, well, LeBron is somebody who's born with all of these skills. And so it's not fair. But at the same time, there are a lot of people who are born with skills who don't do anything with them. There are a lot of people who are born with all kinds of attributes that they never exploit. They don't have the work ethic, or they don't have the wherewithal to do it, or they just don't care about it. They want to do something else. They might have the physical characteristics of a basketball player, but they really want to be a musician. So there's all kinds of examples of where, there are people who have those abilities and have chosen not to use them. And so, people who succeed at the level of a Stephen Curry or a LeBron James have a really incredible work ethic. And also, they have to have the kind of mentality that says that they're not going to stop. They're not going to quit. They're very resilient. And in order to achieve an impossible dream, one has to have an impossible belief in themselves and a near impossible work ethic. So, although it's not just easy that somebody rolls out of bed and they're able to play like LeBron, and although they wear some pretty impressive shoes, it's not the shoes that make the player either. So, there's a lot that goes into uh, getting to that level. And whether someone is at the highest level of sport or they're at the highest level of music or at the highest level of business or at the highest level of just about any field out there, there's a lot of personal growth and development and struggle and perseverance that goes into that, to getting to that level. And if it were easy, everybody would be there. And so few people get to the top because typically they have an extraordinary work ethic and willpower, extraordinary determination, extraordinary dogged persistence to get to the top. So then, should they have to give all their money away because they put in the work and also maybe a little bit of luck? Maybe they got noticed, they got opportunities here or there. But luck, some people say that luck is really preparation plus opportunity. And so, should they have to give away their wealth to people who, maybe they didn't have that kind of drive? So, the libertarian argument says no, they should not. They should not have to do that. And that's unethical to expect someone or to require someone to have to give up their wealth just because they clawed their way to the top of their field, and they're being reimbursed for their efforts. There's another theory that, well, we get it, that there are certain people who have these skills and talents and they're successful, but um, what is the real value of what they do? What is the real value of someone who makes a huge income from singing songs? When you compare the value of that, or entertainment, when you compare the value of that to the value of someone whose job is to feed children at a school and make sure that they're all um, getting nutritious meals, is it more important to reward someone for a song as opposed to rewarding someone for preparing nutritious meals? Um, why does somebody who works in a cafeteria at a school, why are they paid less than somebody who comes out with a hit song or somebody who can shoot a basketball? And so the libertarian argument says, well, you know what? This is what the market is deciding. The market says that people are willing to pay $100. Nowadays, they're willing to pay $700 or $800 to sit at the front of the stadium, to have a floor seat at that basketball stadium. And if the market says that this is the value, then no one should step in, certainly not the government. The government should not step in and control the market. And if the government does that every time someone is being paid a lot of money that it thinks doesn't deserve it, the government is constantly going to be interfering in the market. And so the markets say, people will say that, yes, I'll go ahead and I'll pay this expensive ticket to see Taylor Swift sing or to see LeBron James dunk a basketball, that it should not be the government's role to step in and interrupt the market. So there's that criticism there. All right, so um, I want to go to another section of the text, and it talks about some ethical decisions. And so one of them is about selling kidneys. So towards the end of this chapter, it talks about should people be able to sell their kidneys? Should they be able to get assisted suicide? And what about even consensual cannibalism? And that's also in this chapter. So it talks about those things like should society allow that, or should government step in and not allow those kinds of things? And so going back to the analysis of the harm principle, um, does that do harm to someone? So some would say, well, you know what? People should be able to make their own decision if they want to sell their kidney. If they want to sell their kidney, it's only going to harm that one person who has decided to sell their kidney, and it's not harming anybody else. And so they should be free to make their own mistakes. And it could be a mistake later in life if they end up needing their second kidney and they sold it away. but the government should not be in the business of telling them that they can't do it. And other examples like the assisted suicide. Um, there are some places where that's becoming legal. And one of the arguments is the harm principle argument that it only hurts the individual who is opting to have it, and that it doesn't hurt others, assuming that they don't have dependents who are young and growing up and need their parent to raise them. So uh, it's a theory that, well, you know what? Government shouldn't say that, government shouldn't stop someone and say that they can't have assisted suicide, that they cannot commit suicide uh, because they're struggling with an illness, just because the government values their life, their living at a time when they see their living as harming them more than if they were to die. And so um, it's a moral argument. What should the limits of government be? Should government be able to stop someone from doing that kind of thing? Well, there is those who would say, well, it benefits the public in order to have a pro-life government that protects life, protects the sanctity of life. And if government allows people to do something like assisted suicide, then it's a slippery slope situation. And people will stop thinking of life as something to be protected. And then everyone's life will be at risk because people might say, well, um, if assisted suicide is allowed, then maybe other types of homicides are also allowed. And so abortion is another issue where there's a difference of opinion in society about the ethics around it. Um, some people think the role of government should be to protect people who have not been born yet. And so they say government should protect the unborn, and they call their movement pro-life or anti-abortion. And there are others who say that the government should not interfere with a person's decision, a woman's decision, whether to carry a pregnancy to term. And they'll say that the pregnancy is uh, a relationship between a host organism and a dependent organism. And the dependent organism uh, has not developed to a point to uh, understand uh, at some point in the pregnancy, perhaps the dependent organism has not developed to a point to understand or be conscious of what's happening around it. And therefore, if they were to apply the felicity calculus, they would say that, and people don't always do this consciously, but um, it could be a kind of maybe subconscious felicity calculus that some people are using, where they would say, well, it would do more harm to force a woman to carry a pregnancy to term than it would benefit the life of the fetus, which has not yet gained awareness, if it were to be aborted. And so some people would apply that kind of felicity calculus on abortion. And this becomes even a more fraught issue when things like assault are factored into the equation. Would it cause more harm to even a minor when the age of someone's factored in? Would it cause more harm to an adolescent who was assaulted and is pregnant to force her to give birth to the infant of her attacker? Would that cause more harm to her than uh, benefit or pleasure or lack of pain to the fetus to allow it to be born in that scenario? Um, so so that's a look at how some of these moral dilemmas play out when we apply the utilitarian arguments to them. So from a deontological perspective, uh, a rule or a duty is something that should be followed all the time, no matter what. And so some would say, from a deontological perspective, that an abortion is wrong, and assisted suicide is wrong, um, and allowing someone to sell their kidney is wrong. And so those types of rules should always be followed, no matter what the outcome. So the ends do not necessarily justify the means. So the means are of paramount importance, and you have to follow these rules in order to maintain a civilized society. So we're going to explore the deontological perspective as well. And so the key points with chapter 3 of what's the right thing to do. A democratic and rational appeal of utilitarianism. Some people will say, yeah, it's a great idea. Redistribute this wealth, redistribute $1 million to 100 people. They'll each get 10 grand, and everybody will be happy. And then there's the criticisms of it: disregard for individual rights, measurement problems, like how much is enough, or how many people should benefit, or what amount of taxes is fair, and things like that. And then moral dilemmas. So let's take a look at a moral dilemma. So we talked about Robin Hood, and we'll get to deontology in just a bit. But we talked about Robin Hood, stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. One of the ideas of utilitarianism is that, it's better to benefit a greater majority of people, um, and maybe the harm to the minority might be small compared to the benefit to the majority. Or maybe you can do something that might seem morally wrong, but when it benefits people to such a greater extent, than if you hadn't done the action, then perhaps the action ends up being morally justifiable. So this next clip, it comes from a series that delves very skillfully into moral dilemmas and hedonism, and that series is called Curb Your Enthusiasm. And so this next clip is a good example of moral ambiguity and utilitarianism, and do the ends justify the means in this situation?
I'm home. One for you and one for you.
Oh, Dee, this is
My two favorite girls. Come on, give it up.
doing well.
I broke it down and I rectified.
You rectified.
See this hand?
Uh-huh.
That's where she just had some lunch.
That's what I'm
So the
talking about.
application is okay and everything's back on track.
It's
So okay.
go on track. You could
on
take that
track.
grade off.
About the kids don't
Larry.
think that. These are real nice, LD.
That is so sweet. You. I'm gonna put these in some water.
Okay, all right. Put them in something, and
What are you doing?
what's this?
Oh, seriously. Let me put some water. Yeah, I can wait just 1 second.
Oh,
Why did you leave that stupid message on my answering machine?
what?
I don't want to hear about the money
Yeah,
anymore.
no one will take this money. I couldn't give it to a bum.
Listen to me. I don't care about the money. Someone stole flowers that were marking the spot where my mother was hit in her wheelchair.
Really?
Yes, I'm not a violent person, but if I find this guy, I don't know what I'm going to do to him. I can't believe that a human being would do that.
How would you even know the flowers are missing?
I keep track of it. I drive by there 10 times a day.
Okay, you know what? You should go home now. Don't worry about the 50. I don't even care about it anymore.
Who said I smell?
What? There's no smell. What do you mean?
It's a white lily.
I don't even know what a white lily?
I know a white lily.
Huh?
I got a good sense of smell.
What are you doing? Where are you going?
There they are. I knew it.
Hi, Marty.
Hi, how are you, Cheryl? Boy, those are beautiful.
Thank you.
Where'd you get them?
Larry just brought them home for me.
Where'd you get the flowers?
Where did I get those? Oh, Ventura Boulevard.
What store?
What was it?
Where can I find a base?
Did you take the flowers at my mother's site?
What?
What?
They wouldn't take the 50 at the flower store.
How could you do
man.
that?
Why? There's so many of them. I didn't know it was such a big. Is that such a big?
Oh, my God.
What does she need?
Flowers for Marty's mother.
Well, it's not a graveyard. It's a roadside memorial. It's not such a. Come on.
How could you do this? And you know what? I am missing one. Where's the third bunch? There were 3 bouquets.
I know where it is.
He will get you that bouquet.
I feel sorry for you. If you weren't my best friend, I would take my bare hands and pop your head off your neck.
It's not my best friend.
You better get those flowers.
Yeah, so that's an example of a moral dilemma there. So was it right to take the flowers from the roadside memorial and give them to his wife and his maid at his house? Was that fair? Uh, was that the right thing to do? I think the third bouquet he gave to someone he was trying to impress. He was trying to help a friend's child get into their school, and so he tried to impress them by taking them some flowers in an interview as a reference for the student. Um, and so did it justify did the ends justify the means? One would say, well, it actually did not justify the means in that situation because the hurt that it caused someone seemed to be a lot greater than the joy that it caused to the recipients of the flowers. Um, but another argument could be, well, the flowers weren't doing anything but just laying by the road, and so and there were a lot of other flowers by the road, so those 3 bouquets would not be missed that much because there were so many others. But in this situation, the 3 bouquets were very much missed. And so, using that same analogy, we could examine the idea of taxation of the wealthy. That maybe if we take $1 million from a billionaire, they might not miss it too much. But maybe they would. So that clip goes into the moral dilemma there. Uh, Stealing from the roadside memorial in order to give to someone else. All right, so let's look at another case study, and this is the trolley problem, real world scenario, the trolley problem. And this is a good example of how utilitarianism operates and the moral dilemmas that are created by following utilitarian ethos. So, what are the ethical considerations of sacrificing one person's life in order to save five others? Um, and what's the cost benefit analysis that we can learn from it? So let's take a look at the trolley problem, the famous trolley problem in philosophy.
A runaway train is heading towards five workers on a railway line. There's no way of warning them, but you're standing near a lever that operates some points. Switch the points, and the train goes down a spur. Trouble is, there's another worker on that bit of track too, but it's one fatality instead of five. Should you do that? Many people think the right thing to do would be to switch the points, to sacrifice one to save five, since that produces the best outcome possible. Now imagine the train heading for the workers again. This time it can only be stopped by pushing a very large man off a bridge. His great bulk would stop the train, but he'd die. Should you do that? Most people say no. But why not? Both thought experiments are cases of sacrificing one to save five. What the trolley problem examines is whether moral decisions are simply about outcomes or about the manner in which you achieve them. Some utilitarians argue that the two cases are not importantly different from each other. Both have similar consequences, and consequences are all that really matter. In each case, one person dies and five are saved, the best option in each harrowing situation. But lots of people say they would switch the points, but they wouldn't push the man off the bridge. Are they simply inconsistent, or are they onto something?
Okay, so how is it different? Pushing the man off the bridge versus switching the lever. So some would say, well, in the lever situation, the train is going to go on one track or another. And so somebody's going to end up dying, either the one person by himself on the one track or five workers on the other track. But the train can't be stopped. It's moving, and somebody's going to die by train on the track, working in the wrong place at the wrong time. And so if you switch the lever, then the person who's already on the track is going to die. They're already there though. So it was going to happen to either them or the other five. Whereas with the large man on the bridge, if you push him over, you've put him in harm's way where he wasn't before. And so he also didn't sign up to work on the train tracks. And so he did not he did not consent to the risk of being a railroad worker. And so he's unsuspecting. And so he doesn't expect to suddenly end up on the tracks from where he is, the safety of the bridge. And so you have the element of surprise. You also have somebody who never assumed the risk of being on the track. And also you have someone who has to be placed in harm's way, who is not already in harm's way. So you have those three elements when you have to make the decision to push someone off of the tracks in order to save the five. And so in that scenario, the means are different. And so you get the same result, you get the same ends, but the means might feel more calculated. One could say in a situation where you're deciding whether to pull the lever for which direction the train is going to go, that feels more like uh, you're making a decision that is less cold blood. And so it's a panic type of decision where you have to do one or the other. You just have to pick one, and either one you're going to end up with fatality. Whereas with pushing somebody off the bridge, you have to now put somebody in a position to be harmed. And that maybe it feels to some people like it's more of a cold-blooded type of action because they weren't in harm's way before and you've placed them in it. And so someone say, does that become immoral or does that become unethical to place someone in danger who wasn't in danger before in order to save some others? Some might say, well, you know what? The five workers who agreed to work on that railroad, they knew that a possibility was they could die in a train accident. They knew it was an inherently dangerous job. And so maybe it's immoral to save five people who are ready for that type of risk or who knew there was that risk by sacrificing someone who was completely unsuspecting. So that could be what perhaps is one of the reasons why some people might feel that it's not exactly the same thing to push someone off of the bridge as opposed to just switching the lever. So in that instance, the trolley problem, maybe one action is not exactly the same as the other. So maybe the means do not, the ends do not justify the means in that situation of pushing someone. But people can arrive to different conclusions when they examine the trolley problem. And so the trolley problem is it's a classic type of scenario where utilitarianism is critiqued, and you can arrive at different conclusions applying the same philosophy. So one might say, well, maybe more people are saved if you sacrifice one versus the five. But you could also arrive at the conclusion that the one unsuspecting person being placed in harm's way, maybe that's a greater harm in itself than five railroad workers who knew of the risk. All right, so let's take a look at a different theory, deontology. Deontology. And first, I want to show a clip that explains what deontology is.
Deontology. Deontology is an ethical theory that uses rules to distinguish right from wrong. It is often associated with philosopher Immanuel Kant. Kant believed that ethical actions follow universal moral laws, such as don't lie, don't steal, don't cheat. Deontology is simple to apply. It just requires that people follow the rules and do their duty. This approach tends to fit well with our natural intuition about what is or isn't ethical. Unlike consequentialism, which judges actions by their results, Deontology doesn't require weighing the costs and benefits of a situation. This avoids subjectivity and uncertainty because you only have to follow set rules. Despite its strengths, rigidly following deontology can produce results that many people find unacceptable. For example, suppose you're a software engineer and learn that a nuclear missile is about to launch that might start a war. You can hack the network and cancel the launch, but it's against your professional code of ethics to break into any software system without permission. And it's a form of lying and cheating. Deontology advises not to violate these rules. However, in letting the missile launch, thousands of people will die. So, following the rules makes deontology easy to apply. But it also means disregarding the possible consequences of our actions when determining what is right and what is wrong.
Okay, so deontology, that theory has been used to explain following orders or following rules because they are the rule, and people just have to uphold their duty regardless of the outcome. And so at the end of World War II, during the trials at Nuremberg over Nazi atrocities, there were some Nazi officers who claimed they were just following orders, and that they weren't they were not responsible for the outrageous atrocities that took place as a result of their actions because they were following the orders of a higher authority. And so we will explore the concept of following orders in this course as well. But first, I want to talk about deontology and how there are some critiques of deontology and how it should or should not be applied or followed. So Immanuel Kant's critique of utilitarianism is that human beings are the ends themselves. Human beings should not be treated as expendable kind of means, that they're not means. So a human is an end in itself. And Immanuel Kant talks about duty-based ethics and the role of moral absolutes. And so in deontology, there are certain moral rules that one follows regardless of what kind of outcome there may be. So you can't sacrifice an individual in order to please the majority if it would require one to violate a duty or violate their moral code in order to do so. And so let's do a comparison of Kantian ethics and utilitarianism. So with Kantian ethics, justice is universal, and there are moral absolutes that are universal, and that matters more than just outcomes. So there are certain things that you cannot do just to achieve a better outcome. So you might have an outcome that is less pleasurable. You might have an outcome where there is more pain involved, but you can't manipulate the means in order to get the outcome that you want, because that would be unethical in deontology. So there are ethical challenges that are posed by this concept of duty and the idea of individual rights. And so when it comes to the concept of duty, to whom does one owe their ultimate duty? Is every aspect of duty as equal to every other aspect of duty? Another question is, well, is the moral code that one is following, is that correct? Is that the correct code to follow? And so if their actions are based on their moral code or a duty to some rule that they must follow, is the rule itself, is it qualified? Is the rule itself a justification for their actions if it results in harm that's done to society? And so let's explore this concept of duty. So this is a story in a religious text, and very often ethics pull from notions that may have origins in various religious beliefs. And so in the Christian Bible, in Exodus, there's the story of the Hebrew nursemaids. Has to pause for a second. So there's the story of the Hebrew nursemaids who were ordered by an Egyptian pharaoh to kill the baby boys who were born to the Hebrews. And in this text, it states that the midwives did not want to follow this rule. They felt like the order given to them by Pharaoh was wrong. And so they decided, well, rather than go and kill every male child born of a Hebrew woman, we'll just pretend that when the women gave birth, that they gave birth before we could get to them, and they were hiding the babies. And so, in this story, the midwives then go out to these women when they hear they're giving birth, and they don't kill the baby boys. And so they go back to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh asks, well, why is it that you're not killing these boys? I gave you an order to kill every Hebrew boy that's born in Egypt. And the midwives told the Pharaoh that, oh, well, when we get there, these Hebrew women are different. They give birth so quickly that whenever we get to them in order to kill the baby boys, that they've already taken them and hidden them. And so we weren't able to kill any of these boys. And so they lied. They lied to the Pharaoh in this story. They lied to the Pharaoh. And so they did not uphold their duty to the Pharaoh. And the reason they don't uphold the duty to the Pharaoh and they don't follow the Pharaoh's orders is because the text says that they were fearful of God. And so they're following God's orders. And so they're thinking that God's orders are more important or take precedence over the Pharaoh's orders. So they don't follow their duty to the Pharaoh. And so this is a good example of, well, to whom do you owe the ultimate duty? And in this scenario, if one believes that they owe their ultimate duty to the Pharaoh, and one is a deontologist, one would say that these midwives were immoral. And the reason why they were immoral was because they didn't follow what the Pharaoh told them to do. The Pharaoh said, kill the babies, and they didn't kill them. And so the deontologists might say, well, if their ultimate duty is to Pharaoh, then they're immoral, they're unethical, even though the result would be something that people would find outrageous, horrible and tragic. Um, but they lied, and that the harm was in the lie. The harm was in the means that they took. The harm, even if the a utilitarian would say, well, the outcome was great. The outcome, yeah, they lied. They lied to the Pharaoh. They lied to their boss, their leader. But the outcome was that the children lived, and so the outcome justified lying. A deontologist might say, well, the lie itself was what was wrong because the lying to the Pharaoh is going to cause a breakdown of society. It's not following the rule. It's not honoring the rule as being dishonest. And so they were dishonest, and therefore that itself is the problem. But then to whom do they owe the duty? So for these midwives, they were ultimately following a duty to God and deciding, well, this Pharaoh's instruction is wrong, and so I have the right to disobey. So is disobedience sometimes an ethical thing to do? Is lying sometimes ethical? This story sort of posits that, you know what, lying can be ethical. Maybe sometimes being dishonest is ethical, it's moral. Maybe it's immoral to be truthful in a situation like that and go ahead and harm someone else. So is it possible then that sometimes it's more ethical to violate the rule and more ethical to be dishonest? So I use that as an example of a story where the duty itself is questionable, and where in that instance maybe being dishonest is the ethical thing, the right thing to do. And certainly one could arrive at different conclusions. They don't believe in a God. They might say, well, if there's no such thing as God, then these midwives, from a deontological perspective, were immoral because they lied and disobeyed the Pharaoh's rule. And the Pharaoh had the power to create the rule for the whole kingdom. So they were supposed to follow that. And they placed their duty to the Pharaoh, and then they violated their oath to the Pharaoh. So those midwives were wrong for not killing the babies and then lying that they didn't do it, that they couldn't do it. All right, so modern applications, justice in law and policy. Let's talk about the implications of utilitarianism and Kantian ethics in criminal justice, healthcare, and AI decision making. So let's start with criminal justice. And so criminal justice is based on the penal code, and the penal code is a set of laws where if you don't follow the law, you're violating the law. And so a violation of the law itself can lead to a person being prosecuted, tried, convicted, and sentenced. And so they can be punished for violating the law. And so when a law is being used as the basis of a criminal trial, the fact that someone has violated the law and is being tried is an example of a Kantian ethic. What about a situation where, let's say somebody violated the law? We have a Robin Hood kind of person. They violated the law and they did it in order to do something to benefit society. So an example would be that someone uh, they're a hacker and they hack into a healthcare system. And as they hack into it, they hack into a database in the healthcare system that where decisions were made over whether people can get life-saving surgery or not, whether they qualify for the surgery. And so someone hacks into the system and they go through and they look at all of the no's and they flip the no's to yeses. And so now those people are able to get access to healthcare because it appears that their surgery requests have been accepted, and the insurance company will go ahead and cover their surgery. So the hacker is then found out. The hacker's found out, and the hacker is arrested and charged. And the hacker faces a long sentence, a long term in prison for hacking into this healthcare system. Um, so the deontological approach would say that the hacker was morally wrong because the hacker violated a law, and just violating that law, that criminal code, means that the hacker should go to prison. And very often, in the criminal justice system, people who violate laws, uh, maybe they stole some food from a store in order to feed their children because they were hungry, but they still end up being prosecuted and they're sent to prison. They're sent to jail, or they spend 6 months in jail for petty theft, or if it's a larger theft, maybe they broke into somebody's house and they went through the pantry and they end up with a burglary charge. So in real life, this happens where people end up going to prison. In the story Les Miserables, uh, in that story from that a French author back in I believe it's the 1800s wrote that, Les Miserables, Victor Hugo. So in that story, the lead character, Jean Valjean, he was arrested for stealing a loaf of bread because he was hungry. And that charge, he was in prison, he gets out, but the charge that record of stealing follows him for the rest of his life. And there's even an inspector who follows Jean Valjean for the rest of his life and suspects that he's a career criminal and he's going to keep stealing. And so this story is from hundreds of years ago, and it's still relevant today. And so people today, they have criminal records that follow them when they apply for new jobs and things like that. Uh, so getting back to our scenario of the hacker, the deontological approach would say, oh, that person, they violated the law, they go to jail, that's it, regardless of the outcome. The outcome, some people were able to get life-saving surgery, but they violated the law, they go to prison, and that's just that's just the system. Um, so a utilitarian approach would say, well, let's think about this for a second. Is that really fair? Okay, so the hacker did hack into the system and some people ended up getting surgery as a result. That's a good thing. Um, the insurance company lost some money, but they're they're still able to operate, so they weren't hurt too much. They didn't miss the money that much, and maybe some shareholders did not get as much in dividends, so they didn't. Instead of making $2 a share, they made $1.50 a share. So it's not that big a deal as far as the harm created, but it created a lot of a lot of joy. So therefore, um, the hacker, maybe the hacker should just be let off with a warning or slap on the wrist, or maybe the hacker should spend a day in jail, but not a year in prison. So utilitarianism might not even punish the hacker at all. They might say, "Well, good job, hacker. Keep it up." Um, Looking at healthcare, Kantian ethics would be that, in healthcare, the rule is the rule. Um, the maybe um, the situation of hacking that took place, the uh, under Kantian ethics is wrong. Under utilitarianism, it's okay. There are other healthcare decisions that could be made, such as when it comes to the confidentiality of a patient. So, under utilitarianism, let's say there's a dreadful new disease, disease that is easy to spread and it's deadly. So, and there's the HIPAA rules, the HIPAA laws that state that a patient's identity is kept secret. And so, um, if the patient has a new deadly disease that's easily spread under the sort of Kantian ethic of deontology, that the patient's privacy is still paramount. So you can't tell people. And people might want to know, well, does my neighbor have this disease? I need to know, does my neighbor have it? Because I was just talking to my neighbor across the fence yesterday. And if it's a deadly disease, I need to know um, that they are the patient who has this disease so I can protect myself. And the utilitarian ethic would say, well, yeah, patient privacy is important, but this situation is different. So, yeah, the patient would be exposed and they'd have to deal with some community embarrassment, and maybe people wouldn't want to be around them for a while. But it's of great uh, importance to the wider community that they know the identity of the patient who has this new deadly disease so that they can protect themselves, or they could all go and get checked for this disease because they've had contact with them. And so the COVID-19 situation is a good example of when uh, some of the ethics around identity were suspended in some countries for patient privacy, and patients were required to do contact tracing or allow their medical provider to do contact tracing, and that necessarily um, involved notifying people that they were in contact with a patient who has the disease or the virus. Um, AI decision making. So, how would Kantian ethics apply to AI decision making? How would utilitarianism apply to AI decision making? So, AI is being used more often to provide um, decisions, to make decisions. And some industries are using AI to help them with things like employment decisions. And they're scanning resumes through their AI software and pulling out the candidates they want to interview for positions. So a one ethic might be that, using AI to make these kinds of decisions, that's morally the right thing to do, that morally maybe AI is less likely to be biased in decision making. And so it's and it allows for a company to scan hundreds of resumes. And so it's extremely efficient, and it's a cost saver for a lot of companies. So from a utilitarian perspective, using the AI, new AI software in order to scan through thousands of resumes and quickly find a few who stand out, um, that the ends justify the means. It saves the company a lot of money and a lot of time to use the software. And maybe the deontological approach to that might say, well, um, it's it's putting a lot of stock and a lot of faith in an unproven system. And so one should be focused on, uh, when you're dealing with human beings, human lives, and their livelihoods, and whether they get a job or not, that the means matter more than the ends. And so, yeah, you can get through reading 1,000 resumes and pull out two or three if you use AI to sort through all the resumes. But you're sacrificing the rights of each individual to have thoughtful consideration of their resume. And so it might be better to slow down and really look at each resume as opposed to relying on the AI to make these decisions. So that's an example of how maybe in AI decision making we can apply these different ethical theories. So consider whether laws and policies should maximize happiness or uphold strict moral principles. So from the felicity calculus, um, the goal should be to maximize happiness, and from the deontological perspective, the goal should be to uphold moral principles. Which do you think is right? That's completely up to you, and that's for you to determine. We're going to shift gears now, and we're going to look at some professional ethics rules. And the focus, since this is a law class, is the ABA rules and the California Bar Association rules for lawyers. So let's take a look at ABA Rule 1.6. And this is about the ethical duty of confidentiality in legal practice. So we're going to go to 1.6 in the ABA rules first, confidentiality of information. And this is the attorney-client relationship. A lawyer shall not reveal information relating to the representation of a client unless the client gives informed consent. The disclosure is impliedly authorized in order to carry out the representation, or the disclosure is permitted by paragraph B, which states that a lawyer may reveal information relating to the representation of a client to the extent that the lawyer reasonably believes necessary to prevent reasonably certain death or substantial bodily harm, to prevent the client from committing a crime of fraud that is reasonably certain to result in substantial injury to the financial interest or property of another person, and in furtherance of which the client has used or is using the lawyer's services. Or three, to prevent, mitigate, or rectify substantial injury to the financial interest or property of another that is reasonably certain to result or has resulted from the client's commission of a fraud or crime in furtherance of which the client has used the lawyer's services. Or four, to secure the legal advice about the lawyer's compliance with these rules, to establish a claim or defense on behalf of the lawyer in a controversy between the lawyer and the client. That's number five. To establish a defense to a criminal charge or civil claim against the lawyer based upon conduct in which the client was involved, or to respond to allegations in any proceeding concerning the lawyer's representation of the client. Number 6, to comply with other law or a court order. Or number 7, to detect and resolve conflicts of interest arising from the lawyer's change of employment or from changes in the composition or ownership of a firm, but only if the revealed information would not compromise the attorney-client privilege or otherwise prejudice the client. Then paragraph C, a lawyer shall make reasonable efforts to prevent the inadvertent or unauthorized disclosure of or unauthorized access to information relating to the representation of a client. So what does this mean? The rule of confidentiality. So basically what it's saying is that lawyers have a duty to keep the communication between the lawyer and the client a secret. That's secret, and only the client can waive their right to privacy in their communication with the lawyer. And so what does that look like? That could mean that if the client doesn't want others to know that they hired a lawyer, the lawyer has to keep that secret. So the identity of their client, they might choose to keep that secret. And that's important in situations where maybe there's a controversy and the client doesn't want everyone to know that they are talking to a lawyer and trying to prevent a controversy or liability from happening. And so they don't want their identity out there yet. It could be a situation where someone is considering a divorce and they don't want their spouse to know that they're thinking about it because they're still trying to figure out their relationship status, or maybe they're trying to figure out their financial situation and they don't want their spouse to start hiding assets. And so they don't want it to be known that they're talking to a lawyer yet. It could be a situation where there's a company that is seeking some guidance on an issue that involves liability to their customers, and they don't want it to be known yet that they are trying to address an issue because perhaps they're afraid that it might alienate customers. It might start making assumptions about the company, and so they just want to get a lawyer's feedback. And so there are different reasons for why a client might want their identity to be a secret for a while. And then there's also the confidentiality of the communication itself. And so the communication could be a client telling their lawyer that they had an affair. So they might not want that to be public record. So maybe their alibi for a crime they're being accused of is they were off with their lover, and they want to keep that communication private. They're not ready to disclose that yet, or maybe it's some other type of secret that they're trying to keep. Maybe they're planning to disinherit someone from their will and they don't want it to be known yet. Maybe they have certain assets and they don't want the general public to know how much money they have because they might make themselves a target for a larger lawsuit. So there are lots of things that are privileged. It could be a situation where someone is holding a secret about a grudge that they had towards somebody else. Maybe they thought about attacking them and then they calmed down, but they don't want it to get out that they considered attacking someone at one point. So there are all kinds of secrets people have. And a lawyer has a duty to maintain the confidentiality of their communication with someone. Imagine if a lawyer's duty of confidentiality could not be trusted. Imagine if the lawyer was someone, or you tell them a secret, and then that lawyer might go out and tell a friend of theirs, and the word gets around. That would create a legal environment where people would not feel they could adequately have representation because they can't speak freely to their attorney. And so there's a public policy reason for why there is a very strict attorney-client rule. And in some jurisdictions, attorneys will not only be subjected to a lawsuit over this, um, and will not only possibly face disbarment for violating their duty of confidentiality to their client, but they could also end up going to jail for it. So this is something that's taken very seriously. The ABA rules are a guideline for other states to follow, and most states have adopted these rules and added to them in some capacity. So what are the exceptions? Lawyers expected to keep clients' confidences, and you'd be surprised some of the things that people will tell their lawyer. All kinds of secrets. And the lawyer has to keep the secret to the grave. So somebody tells you, and you're their attorney, and they tell you a secret, um, and let's say they tell you that they had an affair, or they tell you that they had an extramarital a child, or they tell you that they tried to kill someone, or and they're no longer a threat, but they did this, 10 years ago or something, or they tell you that they stole money out of the cash register at their job, or things like that. When they tell the lawyer these kinds of secrets, that stays between the lawyer and the client. Can the lawyer be compelled to testify against the client? The lawyer can be compelled to testify if the lawyer participated in violating the law. The lawyer might expose themselves in that manner, and that's why lawyers are very careful, usually um, to not advise their clients to violate the law. And so if the client calls a lawyer and says that they just did something illegal, what should they do? Should they run? They're thinking about flying out of the country. The lawyer can't tell them, yeah, you'll probably get picked up, so you better get your plane ticket. The lawyer cannot do that because that would be violating the law. And so the lawyer has to be very, very careful. And in an instance like that, the lawyer would need to tell them what the law about what they did. And hopefully the lawyer will tell them, well, you know what, if you come in, we'll figure out a way where we can have the police come, and it'll be a nonviolent situation. You'll be carefully escorted, and they'll, allow you to get a few things in place, and so that you can be arrested without incident, so nobody else gets hurt, and you can have them take you in privately, so you don't get the perp walk and all of that. But lawyers have to be careful not to advise clients to violate the law. And then where the lawyer's services are being misused in order to perpetuate a crime, then the lawyer doesn't have to keep that private anymore. So a lawyer can call and say to the police that their client is using their letterhead and using letters and forging letters from the lawyer in order to scam people out of money. in a fraud operation. So that's an example of where the lawyer can violate the privilege of the attorney-client, the confidentiality. Um, Another example of in that situation, actually, that confidentiality of somebody saying, "Hey, lawyer, I'm using your services to defraud people, but it's between you and me." The lawyer wouldn't have to keep that secret. Another example is where the client is preparing to kill someone. They have the means to do it, they have a plan in place, and the lawyer knows about it. Then the lawyer can go ahead and tell the police what they've been told in order to stop someone from experiencing a serious bodily injury or uh, being deleted by their client. So those are examples. Another example is where the lawyer can violate the duty of confidentiality is where the client is suing the lawyer for legal malpractice and saying the lawyer, maybe they're saying that the lawyer misused the funds in their IOLTA account, their where they place their retainer for the lawyer. So then the lawyer, in order to defend themselves in the lawsuit against them for legal malpractice, um, they can admit certain things on the stand or in depositions. They can they can talk about some communication only to the extent necessary in order to defend against the malpractice lawsuit. So that's another example. All right, so let's look at the California Rule 1.6. So I'm going to scroll down to the California Rule. Let's see. Rule 1.6, so that you can see that rule and see how similar it is and where there are differences in the Rule 1.6. So here's California's Rule 1.6 for attorneys in California. And it says that a lawyer shall not reveal information protected from disclosure by Business and Professions Code, Section 6068, Subdivision E1, unless the client gives informed consent, or the disclosure is permitted by paragraph B of this rule. And then paragraph B is similar to the ABA rule. It has an exception if the lawyer is trying to stop the client from from deleting someone, or from injuring someone. And it has with serious bodily injury. It talks about how the lawyer has to make a good faith effort to try to persuade the client not to commit a criminal act, not to harm someone that could cause their death or substantial bodily injury before revealing the information. So that's added into the California rule. So the ABA rule says lawyer can go straight to the police. California rule says the lawyer has to make an effort to persuade the client not to do that before then going to the police or others with that information. They have to also inform the client uh, of the lawyer's ability or decision to reveal information. So they would have to say, "Well, wait, before you tell me this," when the client's saying, "I'm so mad, I could take a gun and I could," lawyer said, "Wait a minute, before you tell me this, I think you should know that I have an ability to do this, and I may be required to share this info that you're about to do this to this person." So that I have the ability and the moral decision and moral requirement, based on, my feelings about this, that I can violate this uh, confidentiality. So now that you know that, um, is there something you still wanted to tell me? And then they might go say, "Well, I'm so mad I could do this." And then the lawyer has to try to tell them, "Well, don't do that. That violates the law. This violates this law. There are other ways that we could handle this situation. You know, why don't you sleep on it and then call me first thing in the morning and come down to the office and we're gonna deal with this." So just try to get them off the ledge, um, so that they don't try to hurt someone. And so the other requirements and confidentiality rules are similar in this section 1.6, and the California rules as well. And so it also talks about what a lawyer should reasonably know or based on their experience. Um, so when it comes to the confidentiality rules, so based upon experience, lawyers know that almost all clients follow the advice given and the law is upheld. Um, Basically, use your ability as the lawyer to counsel your client where you can, and that's in the comments of uh, Rule 1.6. Okay, so let's take a look at a couple of hypothetical scenarios and a little bit of debate here. So, scenario one, a client tells her lawyer she plans to break into a motorhome. In this situation, it doesn't involve serious bodily injury, or it doesn't involve a death, a threat of death. And so the lawyer um, doesn't have knowledge that the client is about to imminently um, intend to commit serious bodily injury or death to another person. So for scenario one, it's a sticky situation where if the lawyer does violate the confidentiality with the client and the lawyer tells someone that the client is planning to break into the motorhome, the lawyer will have violated the duty of confidentiality. And so the lawyer uh, will have committed legal malpractice more likely in the first scenario. Um, it's a little bit fact specific though, because if the lawyer has a reason to believe that the motorhome is going to be occupied, there's people living in it, and the client is saying they're going to do a home invasion of the motorhome, that's different because that could result in serious bodily injury, and that scenario might allow the lawyer to then have an ethical basis to violate the duty of confidentiality. But more likely than not, the client saying they're going to go and break into a motorhome that's at a storage unit, um, and steal things from the motorhome, uh, the lawyer should tell the client not to do it. The lawyer should not allow the client to use the lawyer's services in order to do it. So the client should not um, be allowed um, to use their association with the lawyer and go into the storage unit, a storage facility, and say that they were authorized by this attorney. This attorney also works for the person who owns the property, and they're authorized to enter it. Uh, so the lawyer can violate confidentiality in a situation where the client is misusing the legal services to do fraud or harm someone, or commit a crime. But if the client just says, "Hey, I'm going to go to this storage facility and break into a motorhome this afternoon," uh, the the confidentiality still holds. Under the California rules, though, the lawyer should tell the client not to do that and explain why it's illegal. Under scenario two, a prosecutor obtains evidence that could exonerate an innocent person while embarrassing a witness. And so the prosecutor is held to a high standard. And so a prosecutor in this situation has duty to turn over exonerating evidence to the defense. And so it is unethical for a prosecutor to hide exonerating evidence, evidence that could exonerate the defense. So there are some recent examples. There was an example of a very high-profile accident, a high-profile accident involving weapons on a movie set. And the movie set was in a desert, and it was a Western. And a very famous actor was charged with manslaughter because the prop weapon that he had had some type of spring-loaded mechanism that went off, and there was a live round in the weapon that struck, and it ended up in a fatality of someone on set, of somebody who was working on set. And so the prosecution had evidence of the faulty mechanism in the prop weapon, in the prop gun, that it has some type of some unusual mechanism that the actor might not have been aware of. But at the initial trial, that evidence was not turned over to the defense. And so once it came to light that evidence was out there, it ended up resulting in the defense being able to use that evidence and to be able to avoid being in prison and going and being convicted of that. I believe it was an overturned conviction or something along those lines. And so prosecutors have a duty to turn over exonerating evidence. And a prosecutor, if they obtain the evidence, even though it might embarrass a witness, they still have a duty to turn it over. And sometimes prosecutors have to make these types of decisions, and they might choose not to bring charges or not to bring certain charges because of the fact that it could embarrass a witness. And so in that instance, they might say, well, we just won't bring the charge, and the defendant won't have to face that particular charge. And this happens in situations like sexual assault cases where they don't want to put additional witnesses through the trauma of having to be deposed and having to take a witness stand and testify in front of an open courtroom about their assault. And so if they have enough evidence on the defendant, they might not bring every possible charge. So if we were to use the philosophical theories that we've explored in this lecture, we could understand how a prosecutor could weigh the pain that would be caused to the defendant the against the outcome of an additional charge. And they might say, well, if the defendant already faces 2 or 3 counts of of assault, that this additional count for this other witness is it could result in more pain than necessary if the defendant's likely going to serve the same sentence length anyway. So they might not bring every possible charge. Um, so how about some additional scenarios? A lawyer faces the conflict between duty to the client and the pursuit of justice. So if a lawyer is facing a conflict between client's duty and justice, the ethical guidelines provide the basis for a lawyer to make their decisions in a way that they can still sleep at night. And so that's a deontological approach there. That's an example of deontology in action, where the idea is that the defendant is entitled to quality representation, just as a rule, whether the defendant is ultimately innocent or guilty. If they're guilty, they're still entitled to a vigorous defense, and that's just the rule for everybody. And it's based on the idea that it's better for 100 guilty men to go free than an innocent man to be in prison. And so the rule is that a lawyer still has duties to the client, even if maybe in the end, justice is not achieved. So our next scenario here is should legal ethics follow utilitarian principles, maximizing good, or Kantian duty, upholding absolute moral obligations? So I should say that's our next bullet point. And that is a decision that is up to the members of society, whether they think it's better to maximize the public good or to have moral absolutes. The moral absolutes are definitely dependable. They are predictable, so they lead to a lot of stability. And utilitarian principles will sometimes result in the maximizing of good to the greatest number of people. And so a society has to determine what its priorities are and what its ethics should be. And sometimes it might have aspects of Kantian duty, such as the adversarial legal system, where defendants are entitled to a vigorous defense, regardless of whether they're innocent, and utilitarian principles, such as providing public schools so that the greatest number of people are able to get an education, even though it requires collecting taxes from homeowners. All right, so our last bullet point here is AI and privacy's concerns.
Today, we know and track virtually nothing that's happening in our own brains. But in a future that is coming much faster than you realize, all of that is about to change. We're now familiar with sensors in our smartwatches to our rings that track everything from our heartbeats to our footsteps, breaths, body temperature, even our sleep. Now, consumer neurotech devices are being sold worldwide to enable us to track our own brain activity. As companies from Meta to Microsoft, Snap, and even Apple begin to embed brain sensors in our everyday devices like our earbuds, headphones, headbands, watches, and even wearable tattoos, we're reaching an inflection point in brain transparency. And those are just some of the company names we're familiar with. There are so many more. Consumer neurotech devices are moving from niche products with limited applications to becoming the way in which we'll learn about our own brain activity. Brain data, in many instances, will be more sensitive than the personal data of the past because it reflects our feelings, our mental states, our emotions, our preferences, our desires, even our very thoughts. I would never have wanted the data that was collected as I worked through the trauma of my personal loss to have been commodified, shared, and analyzed by others. These aren't just hypothetical risks. Take Entertech, a Hangzhou-based company who has collected millions of instances of brain activity data as people have engaged in a mind-controlled car racing, sleeping, working, even using neurofeedback with their devices. They've already entered into partnerships with other companies to share and analyze that data. Unless people have individual control over their brain data, it will be used for micro-targeting or worse, instead of treating dementia. Like the employees worldwide who've already been subject to brain surveillance in the workplace to track their attention and fatigue, to governments developing brain biometrics to authenticate people at borders, to interrogate criminal suspects' brains, and even weapons that are being crafted to disable and disorient the human brain. Brain wearables will have not only read but write capabilities, creating risks that our brains can be hacked, manipulated, and even subject to targeted attacks. We must act quickly to safeguard against the very real and terrifying risks to our innermost selves. Recognizing a human right to cognitive liberty would offer those safeguards.
Okay, so the last thing I want to talk about is how AI is changing everything and how there's more and more of these wearables. There are people who use all kinds of like Ray-Bans and Google Glasses and well, Google Glasses used to be, but Ray-Bans nowadays and things of that nature. And there are other kinds of wearables. There's watches, smartwatches, and rings and things that track everyone's vitals. But now AI is starting to move into tracking people's cognitive abilities, their sleep patterns, their levels of consciousness, their beta waves, and all kinds of things like that. And so it's possible that AI might eventually, probably will get to a point where it's able to read emotions. And already there are ways of reading people's irises, at whether they dilate or not, to tell whether their vessels are constricting to the point where perhaps they're under stress or they're not, or they're being truthful or not. And so AI can go even deeper than that and give more clarity into how people are thinking, whether they might be lying, whether they are, whether they're thinking consciously or making a subconscious decision, or just all kinds of things AI can do now that, it might even get better at. And that data can be read. So is it ethical? Are there any ethical guidelines that should be put in place? Should people have an absolute right to their privacy of their thoughts? Should there be freedom of not just speech, but freedom of thought that's protected? And should there be a right to privacy in not just one person and effects, but right to privacy in their digital in their digital life, or their digital, not their digital life, their digital imprint on the world, or their as far as like what their body and what their brain is putting out, the electrical impulses and things of that nature? Should people have a right to that? Or is that uh, a violation of the liberty of these companies? If a person wants to voluntarily tell the AI and some software platform all of their innermost thoughts, that maybe they should be allowed to do that and they should be allowed to make their own mistakes and the government shouldn't step in. What about children? What about minors? Should data be collected on a child's thinking? What about data that measures a child's intelligence, um, or their processing speed of information? Should that be allowed? Should this technology be used by schools? Should schools monitor the attention span of the students? And should schools monitor whether they're successfully paying attention doing their homework when they're not at school? There are a lot of AI concerns. And so I just want to leave you with this thought as we are moving towards a more AI future. Nowadays, there's all kinds of social media with fake people. Um, they're selling things, telling people how to believe. Nowadays, propaganda can be created with AI that gives testimonials that look like they're from real people, but might be artificially generated. There's so much that is being produced today that's different from the past, and there are moral and ethical questions around them. And so, with that, I'd like to adjourn this lecture. And if you have any questions for me, please feel free to reach out to me on Canvas.